Ladies and gentlemen, we are so proud to welcome everybody to the International Hypnotists Guild webinar with our friend, our colleague, and the well-famed legendary Doug O'Brien from New York.
Wow.
No pressure.
Awesome.
No pressure.
But I mean, you have a background in NLP, you have a background in havening, and you have a background in hypnosis. So it would be cool to hear your take, a short presentation of yourself so we get you on the map.
Okay, cool. Well, I'd be happy to do that. Just wondering how far back to go. I was born in let me see, that's not boring. I moved to this city of New York City when I was 24 years old in the year of our Lord, 1980. In order to pursue a career in rock and roll. I was a musician. I was a music major in college, a piano major. I played classical piano at Carnegie Hall in 1980, in April of 1980, and then I moved to New York in October of that year. And within a few months, I was playing in a punk rock band in the Lower East Side. My first band was called Ultra Violence. And I don't know if you're familiar with punk rock, but having a keyboard player in a punk rock band is not very often done. So it wasn't long until I found myself into other bands. The band that I was with the longest was called Sharps. Wasn't my title, but that's okay. We were more of a new wave, band with more synth pop kind of thing going on. So we played, first band was places like CBGBs and that sort of stuff. The second band was more places like Studio 54. I don't know if that means anything to you or not, but bigger dance club type venues. It was a lot of fun, no money in it. I was not nearly as successful as all, but it was fun. And then somewhere around 1985, I had this girlfriend who took a seminar from Tony Robbins, a firewalk seminar. And I thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of in my life. Why would you pay money to walk barefooted across hot burning coals? I mean, made no sense. But she was convinced it was something that I needed to do. So she persuaded me that I should take it the next time he came around. So this was approximately, if I remember correctly, April of 1985, that I found myself taking my shoes off and walking across a bed of hot burning coals, saying, "Cool moss, cool moss." And surprise, getting to the other side without burning myself. And in fact, long story short, he was using NLP. Tony Robbins was an NLP teacher at the time. Some people don't know that, but he was an NLP trainer. And this weekend workshop was an intro to NLP. I wanted to learn more. I actually found it very, very exciting and interesting. So I got on staff and worked my way up through staff. I got to the certification course. I had no money as a musician, but I figured out ways to sort of work my way up and got myself to a certification course, got certified in NLP. And at that certification course that Tony Robbins taught for 15 days straight, he brought people like Richard Bandler, who's the creator of NLP. He brought Robert Dilts, who was one of the co-developers of NLP. He brought this guy named Dave Dobson, who was a very unique hypnotist kind of fellow. He rarely used the term hypnosis, but he was doing it. Very interesting guy. Quick story about Dave. Tony Robbins, I don't know if you know him, but he's like this big, like energetic guy. He's all passionate, personal power kind of stuff. So it's that kind of way of doing NLP. He's like, yeah, go. And then Bandler shows up and he's like the opposite. He's just like totally not that way at all. Dilts is like this really like studied, centered guy. I love Robert Dilts. Dobson comes out, and you could tell this guy's like smoking a cigarette just before he came out on the stage. He's like this big rotund dude, and he's talking really slow with his basso kind of voice, and starts telling these amusing stories, but didn't really seem to have that passion that Tony had, and I was going like, what is this guy? But he was funny and fascinating, and I was just sort of on the edge of my seat, like really curious and wondering about this. And then I noticed a lot of the people around me were kind of like falling asleep in their chairs. I'm going like, oh, that is so rude. It's so rude. These people are falling asleep in the middle of this fascinating lecture where he's telling these long stories. I can't believe how rude these people. And then, it kind of dawned on me towards the end of the couple hours that I was like the only one left awake in the place, and everybody else was basically in profound trance. And it sort of got through my thick mind at this point that he was doing that on purpose, that there is this thing happening here. So I was absolutely fascinated by what I thought he was doing. I thought he was doing Ericksonian hypnosis. It seemed like the more that I learned about NLP, because after this training, I said, well, if there's Richard Bandler, if there's Robert Dilts, I'm going to learn from them too. So I went off and studied with Richard Bandler. I went off and studied with Robert Dilts. I got master practitioner in NLP from Robert Dilts, and a few other people. Tad James and Wildwood Small also taught. I took classes from anybody who'd teach me, But it seemed like the people who were really good at it could also do Ericksonian hypnosis. It was this thing. And so I wanted to do it. And I figured that's what that Dobson guy was doing. So I went off and I studied with Dobson. I flew off to this place. He'd kind of retired from his practice in LA and moved to this God forbidden place, like, I don't know, Sweden or something. I don't know. It was way up north. Nobody ever goes there, just out of the way. It was actually near Canada. It was in the United States still, but a place called Friday Harbor, Washington, which is actually very beautiful, just like Sweden, actually. So I went there and studied with him for 2 weeks. And I got a kind of rude awakening as far as he was concerned, is that he does not do Ericksonian hypnosis. He was parallel with, he developed his stuff alongside, at the same time as Erickson. He met him once, but he was doing very different, according to Dobson, very different kind of hypnosis, similar to, but different from, that he called other than conscious communication, OTCC. That was okay with me. I was still learning something that was, very effective and interesting. And it also is interesting in that when I got back from doing all this, in fact, for 2 weeks, I was kind of in a light trance. I was kind of in like, I'm not sure what's going on kind of trance. I got back home, and to my kind of delight but confusion, everything else that I did better. Like all the NLP stuff, just I get better results. Even stuff like my music and my running and stuff, because I was a marathon runner, I just did with ease, with greater ease. It was really interesting. So I became hooked. Also decided, since he wasn't doing Ericksonian hypnosis, that I'd find some people that I could actually study with. So I, again, studied with people like Stephen Gilligan, who was one of Erickson's proteges. He worked with Erickson for years, and other people like Paul Carter. And I was about to say I faked my way, and that's not true. I was a music major. Did I mention that in college? So I had no degrees in like psychology or psychotherapy or anything. So the Ericksonian people had kind of closed the door on people who weren't, legit. You couldn't take their trainings if you already didn't have a PhD or some sort of, legit degree like that. I didn't, so they wouldn't let me into their trainings. So I didn't fake my way, and I matriculated at one of those universities without walls. A lot of internet things now, but this was sort of pre-internet days. This is the early 90s. So it was a university without walls called Greenwich University, and I matriculated in their PhD program there. So for a couple years, I was taking like a class a year, but mostly I was in it so that I could take these Ericksonian classes from these people. So I met people like Ernest Rossi, and took classes from Bill O'Hanlon and all these other people so that I could learn that. It didn't really make sense to me to spend my time learning a psychology degree that I really wasn't going to use. I just wanted to use it to get into the Ericksonian world. So that's what I did. And after a couple of years of doing that, I withdrew from the Greenwich University thing. But I'd gotten what I came for. So that's kind of my story. I've been now teaching NLP and hypnosis since 1990. So I don't know, that's quite a few years. I don't want to do the math. Thank you very much. Just stop right there. Stop. It's been a while. Let's just leave it there. It's been a few years. But yeah, in 2013, I was introduced to the havening techniques by my friend Ira Scott. And yeah, I thought it was silly, kind of like my first response to NLP. I thought that was kind of silly. But again, I was open to finding out more, and I went to an introductory training about it, and met doctors Ronald Rudin and Stephen Rudin, and was exposed to this thing that was kind of amazing, kind of like my same response to NLP once. I sat down and observed it. It was amazing. It was an amazing thing. So I've been doing the havening technique since 2013, and I became a trainer in it, I think, somewhere in 2014 or so. So now, like Ulf, I'm pointing over here because that's where he is on my screen. I don't know where he is on your screen, but Ulf Sundstrom is a havening trainer there as well. I don't know what your screen looks like. I'm seeing everybody on this thing, but that's cool.
They're all different. Everybody's screen is different. One question before you continue.
Yeah.
So was his hypnosis completely different from Ericksonian or not?
Yeah, great question. Well, you know, that reminds me of a story. Some of you are smiling, and those of you are just images of you. I know you're smiling in the inside. Yeah, because Erickson obviously told a lot of stories. So did Dobson. They're very, very similar as far as I was concerned. There are some differences that I could expound upon if you're interested, but Erickson and Dobson both were story-centric and told stories in such a way that they were, you know, offering suggestions within the stories, but, you know, really doing it for a reason. I think for most of Dobson's stories, they were, I don't think he gave embedded commands. I don't think he did that sort of thing with language so much, but he was interrupting patterns that he perceived in the person and proposing other possibilities of things they could do instead. In a general nutshell, that was kind of the way he approached his storytelling. But he did a lot of that. That's why, you know, like I said, the first couple of weeks that I was in the first fun shop I did with Dave, I finally did 5 altogether. I was just kind of like, didn't know what was going on. They were just story after story after story. And some exercises and things which sort of made sense, put little markers along the way. But mostly I was in a trance for a couple of weeks.
And that's kind of cool. And in some of the, I even read, there's a pretty cool book written by Ernst Rossi and Milton, and I keep forgetting the title, but Fredrik, you'll remind me.
It's Hypnotic Realities.
Yeah, Hypnotic Realities. Have you read that one, Doug?
Yeah. Good catch, Fredrik. Yeah. Yes, I have.
It's a cool book, and he says something about, you know, never leaving people in a trance when they leave.
Well, I don't know if Dobson intended to, but I was just in one for 2 weeks. So, you know, we're in trances all the time anyway. So I suppose the question is it a functional trance or not? And I think one of the points that Dave Dobson's work was that, yeah, we are in trances all the time. That's a given. Question is it a functional trance? Is it serving you? You know, or is it a useful trance? So basically his idea was that we can interrupt the patterns of the old trances and put in some patterns from the new trances, and then make it so that the new trance that you're in when you leave is a functional, positive trance, so that you become more functional. And I think that's a fair way of looking at things. Do you guys agree with that? Do you believe that we are in trances all the time?
Yeah.
This means yes. What? I'm not sure what.
This is yes.
Yeah. So to me, it's kind of like this. The way I see, because, you know, over the years, I've decided I would be open. Back up a second. I have great respect for Ulf. I really sincerely do. And he was the guy that showed me tapping in a way that I believe in tapping now. Up till my connection with Ulf, I thought it was horseshit. That's a technical term, but in America, it means I didn't believe in it very much. Because the first time I had seen it done, or somebody offered treatment on me because I was having this splitting headache at a Dave Dobson workshop. It didn't work at all, you know, and I was pounding away on my head, or he was pounding away on my head, and I just left with a worse headache than I started with. And I thought, oh my God, this is the stupidest thing ever. And I believed that for 15 years, probably, until I met Ulf and he showed me a different way of approaching that. So I decided after Ulf that I would be open to all, well, not even just giving him credit. But I decided I would be open to other possibilities. So I've taken courses in just about every form of hypnosis. I've done stage hypnosis classes. You know, I know how to do hypnosis pretty good. I've traveled this country of the United States doing large group seminars for weight loss cessation. We do 2 hours for weight loss, then 2 hours for smoking cessation, then go on to another city and do it again. So that kind of, 2 hour, get it in and out sort of thing is not Ericksonian. That is, I'm telling some stories in there, trust me, there are some elements of it in there, but I'm also like putting him into trance and saying, you'll quit smoking and okay, get out next, kind of thing. So I do it all, if you can imagine that, or have done at least. So I have great respect for the different uses of different forms of hypnosis. My preference is, if I have the opportunity, and generally speaking, I make sure that I do, is that I don't do it that way. I don't do those, mills. I respect that the person that is in front of me, this individual is in front of me, is, as Erickson said, as individual as their own thumbprint. And it's not for me to say, you should be like this or you should be like that, but it's for me to help create an environment where they find that for themselves, so that we create a change over time. I will also say, of course, that Erickson had an advantage over me, not the least of which that he was a genius. I'm not. But besides that, he had another advantage, and that is that he saw people for long periods of time. He was a psychotherapist. He was a psychiatrist, right? So people would come into him. They didn't expect him to fix them in one session, right? A lot of times these days, for me, I don't know about you guys, but for me, as a hypnotherapist, an NLP guy, people come in, they expect, one session, get her done, and I don't like to work that way. I prefer to, have it be multiple sessions, a string of sessions if possible, because I like to, plant little seeds and suggestions and see how they root, see how they grow, and then, go from there and create these, long-term changes to help that person do that, integral work on their own, that where I set the environment for them to do that or help them create that, and then they make the change internally. It's more of a generative hypnosis rather than I don't know, hypno mill kind of thing, So that's just me. But I do think that we are in trances, and I do think that the difference for me, it's kind of like this. When I did stage hypnosis, I thought of this metaphor the other night when I was sleeping. I woke up to remember it, but I thought of it while I was sleeping. Is that, when I did stage hypnosis, it was kind of like you're standing next to a swimming pool, right? And you're on the deck next to the pool. And then you take the person and you throw them in the pool. And they're like not knowing which ends up. And you throw them a lifeline and say, here, grab this, do this. Now you're safe. Now you can follow me. And you give them the directions. And they're just listening to you because that's what they understand. And they're in this sea of confusion kind of thing. And you've given them this lifeline that they grab onto. And they follow your directions. And it's good. It works because, of course, you're a lovely, benevolent person, aren't you? And so that's a good thing. Ericksonian hypnosis is more like, you go down the steps in the shallow end, and you're walking together, and you dip your toe in a little bit, and then you sort of start wading into the pool, and you get a little knee deep kind of thing, and you're sort of saying, yeah, and you can just drift into it now if you want, or maybe you don't. Maybe you could just, and you just give permission. You just create an environment where they eventually, go into that pool of trance themselves, and they discover that they can swim and that they're in charge and they can float on their back and do various different things. And they're exploring their own power. Not that I've made them do it, but I've invited them to do it, and they're discovering it for themselves. I've really appreciated sometimes when I've done hypnosis with people, and then, after the next session or so, I say, so how's that working for you? And she said, well, I don't think your hypnosis worked very well. And I'm like, oh, really? So tell me about that. She said, well, I did this change all by myself. I made this happen. I'm going like, That's right. You did. It wasn't my hypnosis at all. I love that, because they're right. Of course they did do it all themselves. And I just am a catalyst for that change.
We're very curious about your experiences learning and practicing Ericksonian.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I don't know about everybody else here. I mean, I've read books by Milton, or usually not by him, and usually it's somebody else, like Ernest writing. And I've read, transcriptions. I've looked at, there's a lot of videos they send out from the Ericksonian centers around the world, and some of them are good and some of them are mysterious in their quality. So it would be really nice if you could just explain what you think are the, I mean, you already have in the way that you describe the way you do a session, because that sounds very Miltonish the way you're doing it. But if you could give us ideas, those who are curious to try a more Ericksonian approach, because it's usually taught as broken down into his phrases and words and all kinds of techniques. But I mean, it's more about the principles, I guess, if you want to understand it. How do you go about teaching it?
That's a great question. Yeah, I liken it to teaching music, actually, both, because teaching the language phrases and those kind of embedded command things to me, it's kind of like doing scales, learning arpeggios, learning chord progressions. It's important, but it's not really music. Nobody's going to pay you money to come listen to you do your scales or something. But music is where you put all those things together and create a song. So to me, the music is happening in the relationship. It's the relationship with me and the client. We sort of go into a trance together. In fact, one of the first trances I often do in my hypnosis, my Ericksonian, to be fair, I call it Neo-Ericksonian. Let me just back up for a quick second. That term Neo-Ericksonian is one that I've decided I would use in fairness to Erickson, because Erickson never called what he did Ericksonian hypnosis. Erickson was just talking with people, his descendants, his followers, the people that he learned from after he was dead called it Ericksonian hypnosis. He never certified anybody in Ericksonian hypnosis. It's kind of an interesting thing that people have called themselves Ericksonians, but he never called them that. Dobson was even, more adamant, if you will, that nobody could say that they were Dobsonian or whatever. He was just like, I'm just doing other than conscious communication, kind of thing. So one of the first things I do when I teach a class is I represent, it's like, this isn't really Erickson. I'm not teaching what Erickson taught. Erickson told stories. I have this, hold on a second, this set of videos. Set of videos that I got recently called In the Room with Milton Erickson. Have you guys watched these? All it is if somebody set up a camera. So when Ernest Rossi and Jeffrey Zag and all those people, when they were learning from Erickson, they just sat in his living room, basically, his studio therapy room. And he told stories. He just did stuff, and he put people into trance, and their hands would come up to their face, and he'd say, "Yeah, that's right," and he'd just be doing shit. And he didn't have a curriculum. He didn't say, "Okay, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do that." He never taught an Ericksonian language pattern, ever. I've got a book I wrote on it, but he never taught that, right? So he just told stories, and people extrapolated from that different things. That's why Jeffrey Zag has a different approach than Stephen Gilligan, that Bill O'Hanlon. They all brought their different, viewpoints to this study of Ericksonian hypnosis. I never met Erickson. I never was in the room with him. I studied from those guys who took different things out. I studied with Gilligan and Hanlon and Rossi, and I studied with those guys. So, and I studied extensively, obviously, with Richard Bandler and John Grinder and the NLP guys. So I think it's only right to say that I'm not teaching Ericksonian hypnosis. I'm teaching a Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis. It's something that's newer than built on the stuff that he left for us. and different from. So,
and what would you say that the core is of Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis?
well, I do incorporate, like for instance, the class that I just finished teaching. I taught a 6-week course in it, 6-weekend course in a 12-day course, where I teach a lot of NLP stuff. I start with very basic NLP stuff, like the meta model. I think the meta model is really important to really unpack how people, believe things, and to really ask good questions to sort of pull apart the individual belief system that the person's operating from, and to understand their model of the world before you start saying, I'm going to now put you in trance. And, you need to understand what their model of the world is. So the meta model is, I think, critical. In fact, I don't know how anybody does coaching without a thorough understanding of the meta model. I just like, how do you do that? So I include that in there. One of the first trances I teach or present as an experience is I have 2 people sitting facing each other, and one person just says to the other person, who are you? And they're just, by the way, they're sitting knee to knee, staring at each other's eyes and breathing at the same time. They're sort of in this open-eyed trance. So they're not saying, I'm now going to put you in trance, but they're just like looking at each other, breathing at the same rate, and one person says, who are you? And the other person comes up with a metaphorical representation, like, I am a mountain, right? And the other person says, that's right, you are a mountain. This train, feet train. I should have little sock puppets, I'm sorry, this just looks really silly to me, but this is how I do it. And then the person says, that's right, you are a sock puppet, you are a mountain. And then he says, and who else are you? And the person says, well, I'm a sock puppet. He says, that's right, you are a sock puppet. And who else are you? And he keeps coming up with other representations. I'm a table lamp. He goes, that's right, you are a table lamp. And who else are you? I'm a dachshund. That's right, you are a dachshund. Right? And what's interesting about this trance is that it usually gets pretty profound after a while. I was starting to get into it myself just now. I was getting slower and getting into it. But people really feel like, yeah, I am. At this moment in time, I am a table lamp. I'm feeling that. And the other person sees that in them and ratifies it, says, that's right, you are a table lamp. And who else are you? So the idea behind this ultimately is not only do they kind of experience an open-eyed trance, which is for most people pretty like earth-shaking experience anyway, just they've never done that before, what they thought of as an open-eyed trance. But they're also starting to do this basic sort of unpacking thing. This exercise, by the way, is done sometimes in like spiritual retreats for days, for like a 6-day retreat where they do this work thing. Like, that's it. That's what they do. Just keep unpacking and, peeling that onion, getting down to more and more of the core of who you are. It's pretty interesting. So they do this with each other, but the idea is that it's helping to open up the rigidity of their identity. So the identity is people usually say, I am X, but I am not this other stuff. This is who I am, and I'm also not this other stuff. All this other stuff, I'm not that. But we're saying, where rigidity was, let flexibility be. Where singularity was, let plurality be. Where one voice was, let many voices be heard. So we're looking to get some more flexibility in this rigidity of this identity of themselves so that they can begin to explore other avenues. It's pretty neat. That's where I usually begin with my trainings, and then we start exploring other things as well. Does that give you an idea of how we start?
I don't have a specific question, but can you elaborate a little bit about there are these embedded commands, there are how to tell stories, because in a way, Richard and John they also studied John Green, and they unpacked it with what do they call it, Milton language, or what's the
Milton
word in
model.
English? Yeah. And the opposite, they sometimes call it the opposite of meta model, the Milton model.
Right, right. Sure. The opposite of the meta model is such that, just to describe the meta model for those of you who may not be completely familiar with that terminology, meta model is from NLP. Is the idea that you can ask questions to get more specific information from the person. Because anything, whether it's English or Swedish, or any language whatsoever, language by its nature is an example, is a representation of the reality. It's not reality itself. The map is not the territory. It's basic NLP stuff, right? But it can never be completely precise. What the meta model does is it takes a generalization like I'm happy. You say, well, how specifically are you happy? And you try to get more, deeper understanding of what exactly they mean. If you said somebody went to the store, say, well, how did he go to the store? How specifically did he go to the store? Did he run to the store? Did he walk to the store? Did he drive to the store? Did he skip to the store? Did he take a circuitous route to the store? Did he go directly to the store? How specifically? So you ask, meta model is about asking questions to get very specific, detailed information to get closer to the actual experience that you're having. Again, you can never get completely to the experience, because even with the unspecified verbs, like he went to the store, if I said, oh, he drove to the store, it's still unspecified. We still don't know exactly how he drove to the store. Did he drive his car to the store? Did he drive his motorcycle to the store? Did he drive, again, a circuitous route to the store? Or did he drive directly to the store? We don't know. But you ask a question, you say, oh, he drove his motorcycle directly to the store. So now we're more specific, but we don't have the experience yet. We don't know exactly how fast or how directly, what store, etc. So that's what the meta model does. It gets more and more specific. The reason they call them the Milton model, the opposite of that, is it wants to get more and more vague. So if I was telling a story to, let's say, a group of 16 people or something-ish, and I said, I went to the beach, it was a delightful day, that one of those special days where everything is just perfect, the air temperature is just right and the sun is shining, but, it feels that really special quality that makes you just feel comfortable all over. That's such unspecified language. I didn't say it was hot. I didn't say it was cold. I didn't say anything specific. I didn't say what beach or what color the beach was or the sky was cloudy. I didn't use any specifics in that very much at all. And yet people can, take their own explanation of what I meant there and create your own imagery and create your own beach. It feels right. Suddenly I were to say, the stony beach, the stony sand, the stony surface beneath your feet kind of hurts your feet when you walk. Be like, wait a minute, that's not my beach. It would be different from. So you don't want to be specific in Milton model. You want to have that vagueness so that people can, supply their own. So that's what the Milton model is supposed to be like. That's why they call it the opposite of the meta model. And for me, what I usually look at the Milton model as being is a variety of different Ericksonian language patterns that offer you the opportunity to suggest differences, suggest ideas to people, alternatives to people that they might not necessarily be thinking of their own. Hypnotic suggestions, right? Instead of saying you will quit smoking as a direct suggestion, you'd say something like, yes, well, William was wondering how it was that he became a non-smoker. Remember that it happened just recently. Something shifted inside. That feeling that happens when you shift suddenly and everything's different. And suddenly this is different now. I will never go back. And you look back behind you and you see yourself off in the distance there. So it's vagueness. And it's giving suggestions of saying you'll be a non-smoker without saying you will be a non-smoker. So it gives you that ability to do that. Storytelling is like that. Storytelling is like you create a scenario that every human being gets into. It's in our DNA. This is not something that NLP made up or Ericksonian made up. This has been around since people have been around. Back before electricity, back before civilization, when we were, living in yurts, because that's what there was, we told stories. That was our internet. That was our encyclopedias. That was our, lessons and religion and stuff. It was stories. We are made for it. So when a person starts telling a story, our brain goes, we perk right up. We want in, right? And we also associate with the hero of the story. Whoever is the protagonist of the story, it's like, oh, that's me. I'm like that. We glom onto it. So when we put our hero into a situation that something happens and then they learn something, we learn it. The listener learns it. So that's, I believe, how mostly Dobson and Erickson use stories. But within that, you can use this Ericksonian language stuff, like the Milton model, to give a direct suggestion by using things like what I just did, pointing. That's called an analog marking. You'd say, you're going to quit smoking. You can quit smoking. Now you can shift your tonality. You can emphasize the verb, use your language like that to embed these suggestions within a story. So therefore, your story could suck. Your story could be like a really crappy story. That's, again, a technical term, excuse me. But you could have a story that's really not so great, but you could still use the language within that. So I could talk about how I was walking down the street the other day. I'm on 29th Street here in Manhattan. I don't know if you know that, but all of you've been here. I have an office here on 29th Street in Manhattan. I was walking down the street the other day to get a tuna fish sandwich from the corner deli. And I realized that, there are no ordinary moments. I suddenly looked around me and I thought to myself, this is special right now. Every moment is really special when you stop and think about that now, haven't you? When you give those suggestions like that, walking to get a fucking tuna fish sandwich becomes, a therapeutic metaphor. Sorry, did I say that out loud? I'm so sorry. It's fine. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Brilliant. And I noticed your comments there. The obvious, of course, but in the first story with the quit smoking.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
That's very elegant. Go on.
But you do it naturally because you've done it a lot.
No, you know what? I don't do it naturally. I do it a lot. I've done it. I've gotten good at it because I've done it a lot. It's like music. It's interesting. I saw this cartoon recently, this lovely cartoon. This little kid was drawing, and this other little kid comes up and goes, wow, you're really good at drawing. How did you get so good at drawing? She said, practice. And the other little kid says, was it something that was just innate inside you and you just discovered that you could draw so well? So no, it's practice. So did you find out that it's like, it's practice. It's practice, it's practice. I sucked at this stuff when I started. When I first learned how to do, when I first took classes in Ericksonian hypnosis or NLP, I was not good. I was not good at this stuff at all. It's because I've been doing it now for...
I didn't mean it was a God-given gift. I noticed that you have practiced, so you do it naturally.
Thank you. No, I just was using it as a teaching moment. I appreciate it.
Understood. Yeah, there are two questions in the chat. I don't know if you see the chat, but one is from Matthias Olsson, and he's saying, sounds Jungian, what you said about the stories and the hero. Would you agree?
That is Jungian, yes. A very good catch. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And then Dan is saying, how do you mix havening with hypnosis?
Ah, wow. Great question. Dan, do you do havening?
Yeah, Dan does. He's certified.
Oh, man. Excellente. So getting back to Jung for a second, yeah. Interesting thing about, I mentioned that all those different people took different parts from Erickson. Stephen Gilligan's take from Erickson was tinged a lot, and Ernest Rossi too. Ernest Rossi was a Jungian. Both Ernest and Stephen have deep roots in Jungian psychology as well. So their viewpoint of what Erickson was doing was through that lens.
But was it?
So, yeah.
Was Erickson also schooled?
Erickson was not.
No.
I mean, Erickson was a brilliant guy who studied probably everything. I'm sure knew all about Jungian psychology, but he wasn't a Jungian by any stretch. No. But so I hope that answers your question. Do you have more questions about Jungian?
No, actually not. It was whether Erickson was schooled in it as well. So
Yeah.
what if you shared some of your best practice? Did you go about practicing these language patterns or these ways of opening loops and nesting them? Was that something that you did in a specific way that you could share? Like, did you write them on paper and sit and read them to an orange with a face on it? Or did you, whatever. Yeah. The crucible.
That's why you get the big bucks, Alf. That's it. So, yes, I did. I again, like I said, it was just a teaching moment, but it is also true that I was not really good at this stuff when I started. And so I said, I'm not sure I said this to myself. Dave Dobson has this thing that he calls a meta 5. Excuse me, I just burped. Do you guys know what a meta 5 is? It's like a metaphor, except better. It's one better than a meta 5. So what you do with a meta 5 is you find out from the person by asking questions and listening, what resources they had as a child. Like, for instance, I loved playing basketball when I was a kid. I was very, very avid basketball player, and I also liked playing American football. We'd play it in the streets. So those are things like from my childhood that really are not part of my life anymore, but they're still in me, still like part of my thing. So if you then told me a story about baseball, you're like, it just doesn't really make much sense. Or, European football, soccer or whatever, it's like, I have no references for it. But if you told me a story about basketball, then my brain would go like, oh yeah, I know what you mean, right? It would be hitting in my DNA. It would be hitting in my cellular level. I'd understand it. So Dobson would have these kind of meta 5s. And I once, after a Dave Dobson workshop, my second Dave Dobson workshop, I decided I would play for people. We went to a local bar. There wasn't much happening there in Friday Harbor. So we all went over to this local bar, and I played this little concert. So I played some blues stuff that I'd been working on, but also, played some of the classical stuff that was in my fingers, some Joplin and Bach and Beethoven and Chopin and stuff. I worked up this version of, what's it called? I can't remember the name of it. This thing that Carol Erickson, Dave's wife, liked. So I worked up the version of that. But after I played for these people for about 45 minutes or so, Dave said, I want you people to notice that Doug is pretty good at playing the piano. And he didn't get that way overnight. He got that way by practicing. And I'm just wondering how much better he's going to be able to be at other than conscious communication when he begins to appreciate that he can apply his way of learning music to other than conscious communication. And so it's like, that may be when I started doing it. But I did. To answer your question directly, I went home from these trainings and said, I'm going to try to be like Erickson, like Dobson, like Bandler. I'm going to see what I can do. And I would write these things out. As bogus as I was at the beginning, I wrote them out. And then I didn't read them to an orange with a face on it, although I love that idea. I would just have them. And once I think, I wrote one for a specific client. And then after I did a little trance induction and got them to close their eyes, I pulled my notes out and read them the trance. But that, I think, was once out of the thousands of trances I've done with people. I don't like the idea even of reading something to a person when they're there with you. It's one thing if you're recording a trance for, publication or something later on for distribution. But if you're working with a person, it's the relationship. You're with that person. You keep your eyes open. You keep your eyes on them. You're with them. They can close their eyes. They can go wherever they want. But, you're there with that individual. So I usually would write these things out for practice. And then when I was in the room with an individual, I would just, sort of basically be winging it. It's kind of like practicing at home, and then when you go to the concert, you don't play scales. You play songs, and you sing what they want to hear, and you read the room, and you play. Wow, my screen just changed. That's cool. Yeah. So, any other questions? How do I mix havening with hypnosis? Well, gosh, havening, obviously, people go into trances. One of the things I noticed a long time ago when I had massages done or when I went for Reiki treatments, I'm also a Reiki practitioner, although I don't use it, is that people automatically, go into trance when you're having some body work done of any kind. It's an altered state, right? It's an altered state. So I long ago thought, why not use these language patterns when they're in this altered state? Why don't you just use them now? And I would start to put them in when I was doing whatever I was doing, doing a Reiki treatment, when I was doing those things, I'd just say, and as you feel that energy in your body, you can just allow yourself to relax even deeper. That's right. That's good. Good. That's right. Because that healing energy is now permeating every cell in your body. And I just talk like that while they're going into this stuff. And I basically do the same thing with havening. Havening is a trance induction a lot of times. We do a lot of things for distraction, etc. But while this touch is being applied, and that's an altered state for most people anyway, just to have this thing going, and their brain is being flooded with delta waves. Usually, when I am finished with event havening, the transpirational havening, when I've sort of gotten the suds down to a 1 to a 0, then I'll start going for the affirmational havening, the informational havening. I'll start putting in imagery of what they want their life to be. So I'll ask them to visualize what they want their life to be, how things will be different now that this thing is in the past. And so as they're visualizing that, then I sometimes get a little bit more directive, right? So then I'm still doing the havening touch, or they're doing it with themselves, but I'm now starting to use the language patterns in that second part, because it is kind of like that anyway. In NLP and hypnosis, we always talk about future pacing. You get rid of the problem, but then what's the future going to be like now that you don't have that problem anymore? So you create a new future. So with the informational and affirmational havening, we're looking towards creating that new future for them. Cool. I do that with hypnosis.
So Doug, if you were to give advice to people who were interested in learning more of that Ericksonian and maybe finding the difference between the different, I would love to sit you within another hour and just hear you say, what would you say the characteristical difference was between how Rossi did it and how Hamlin did it, or how Jillian did it, or how Dobbs did it? Because everybody, like musicians, you can hear them. It's the blues scale, or it's the scale, or whatever. But everybody has a kind of little twist, and if they do it long enough, that twist is usually a very good one.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I don't know if I could actually answer that question in reality fairly to those people. It was a long time ago. It was the early 90s when I was, took those. And when I say I studied with them, I took a class like a few hours long with Rossi, a few hours long with O'Hanlon. Gilligan I took longer seminars with, but most of those names that I mentioned in the Ericksonian group were, at a conference where it'd be like a 2-hour class with Rossi. One of the things I learned from Rossi that was brilliant, and perhaps I'll leave you guys with this, is this this way of doing I guess a fairly typical induction. I'm sure you guys know this. people say, oh, that's the magnetic hands thing. Yeah, it is. But it's also done in a way that's not directive. So you have a person hold their hands like this and focus their eyes in between their two hands. So their eyes are focused somewhere along the midline. And then you just use permissive language. In Ericksonian language patterns, we call it covering all range of possibilities. And you say things like, and as you focus your eyes between your hands, I don't know if your hands will come together, or if your hands will move apart, or if your hands will stay right where they are. Which covers the range of possibilities. You know what's going to happen. But whatever does happen, say their hands start going like this. You go, that's right. Excellent. You're opening up to new possibilities. You're embracing the world around you. You give positive spin on whatever it is that does happen. You utilize what happens. If their hands don't move an inch, if they stay right where they are, you say, excellent. Yes, that's right. That means you're steadfast and steady. You know exactly what you are in this world. That congruency is power. You give power, positive impact. And if their hands do what 90% of people's hands do and they start coming together, you go, yes, that's right, excellent. Things are really coming together for you now. And as your hands touch, then you can go even deeper into trance. That's right. And you just, let them go like that. I love that sort of thing. I love creating an opportunity for a person to, walk into this pool of trance and start swimming around and saying that, I'm exploring my world, my reality. I did I did quite a bit of shamanic work back in the day, if you want to call it that. You could just say it. I did drugs. But I did a lot of interesting exploration of altered states out in the woods and with drums beating and lots of interesting things going on, and it was totally that. It was exploring altered states, and it was remarkably healing, but that really wasn't the point. It just was, and I think Ericksonian hypnosis can be that. It's just like this, like an acceptance and appreciation of who you are and this amazing reality of right here, right now, and I'm good. I'm fine. I'm perfect the way that I am. And if I choose, I can also say, and I don't need cigarettes for that, and I don't need to drink alcohol or whatever, whatever change they might have come in for. Great. You add that into the mix as well. But it's a generative hypnosis. It's a explorative hypnosis rather than a hypno-nil.
Wonderful. We have another question, but because we're running out of time, and we're not bound to the clock, but maybe you are. I'm not sure if we can run over a few secs. But the thing is this: before we go to that question, I do want to ask you if we were to do, when you teach Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, generally, how does that happen? You just said you finished a 6-weekend training, or a 6-week training in the weekends. Is that how you normally do it, or do you teach a 1-day workshop or a 2-day workshop? Is that enough to learn anything of use? How do you do that, Doug?
Well, yes, it is enough to learn something. It's enough to get started. I learned this thing from Ernest Rossi in a 2-hour workshop that he did, and I still use it today. So yeah, it's enough to do something. I moved to this new office that I'm in right now back in September.
Beautiful.
So I used to teach it's really nice. I'm blessed to have it. I used to teach my Neo-Ericksonian class in 3 weekends because I had to pay a lot more money by the hour to teach it. So I would have longer hours, but it would still be 3 weekends. And I would, sort of cram all this material in. Now that I'm here, I've expanded it to 6 weekends because I can. And so we're doing basically the same content, but we're giving it a lot more time to breathe and explore, and giving more assignments of the multiple embedded metaphors. People, I'm telling you something I don't want to admit out loud, but I will. My students are probably better at that than I am at this point, because I made them write these whole things and then tell them to each other and then make them better the next weekend. They learned a lot. And I do teach it in a shortened version, and I will be teaching it. I don't know if you mind my saying this or not, but I will be teaching it in Norway, near Oslo and Lillestrøm, Norway, the end of this month. We'll be teaching a 4-day course in Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis through the Meta Resource Center there in Lillestrøm. Okay. So you can do it, something like that.
Send me the link, and I'll send it out to the people here so they can read up more about it. And
sure.
I'm kind of curious. There are 2 questions. If you have the time and would like to answer them, I'd just like to ask one question to the room before that. How many here? This is not a binding question. I'm just saying, how many here would be curious to learn more Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis?
Excellent.
Okay. Excellent. Cool. Would you have the grace and the dexterity to just give a short answer? And then you can hold your questions, because we have run out of time. This is running on the tail feathers of the whole vehicle.
So in answer to the question about Gestalt therapy, absolutely. In fact, there is a havening process that's called the empty chair technique that is kind of like that, but we also have done that same sort of thing in hypnosis and in NLP before many times. So one of the first books in NLP history was, actually I didn't say that right. One of the ways NLP got started is Richard Bandler was modeling Fritz Perls while he was editing Fritz Perls' book In and Out the Garbage Pail. So Gestalt and NLP are very closely related, and of course NLP and hypnosis very closely related. Erickson did not use much of the meta model as we know it, but he always was asking questions and finding out, what is this person's model of the world, because he was very facile about slipping into the person's model of the world. Instead of saying, you've got to join my model, he was like pacing first, and pacing so well he sort of slipped into their model of the world and then led them from that point forward.
He seemed to work very intuitively from what I've understood.
Yeah.
It's not like he had this recipe or method. He would pick up on so many different levels of signals from people what it was actually about.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's very, very true. And he studied immensely. He would when he was working in the psych hospitals, he would take persons, charts and say, okay, before he met the person, he'd read their chart, and then he'd create this story like what this must be what their story is like, and their life story. This must be what happened to them. And then he'd meet the person and find out if there's anything like that. Or he'd do it the other way. He'd find out their life story and say, okay, this is going to be their presenting problem. And he would, write these then metaphors that'd be like 20 pages long, single spaced of everything he needed to say to get to this person to be in a trance and move them. So he worked his ass off to get to the place where he could be, intuitive.
So cool. Doug, yeah. It's been an immense pleasure. Really, I mean, I have an idea that we're going to explore, and I'll talk to you before I present it to the group here, that might be fun. So I'm leaving that as a cliffhanger until the email comes out. But I just want to say, really, really cool, lots of fun, enjoyed it. And I got a lot out of this. And like you said, sometimes you go to a training, you go a full weekend, you go several days, and you come back and you don't even realize what you got. But then years later, you realize you got something general out of it. Sometimes it's just this technique or something that, like you said, with the way that was done, that sticks with you for a long time. So it's, yeah, very cool. I got stuff out of this, and I hope everybody else did. Ulf Dextagen, who is not able to be visual, is sending a thank you note.
Thank you, Ulf. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your kind attention. It was my pleasure to speak with you.
We hope to see you again in Sweden soon, Doug.
Good. Hope so too.
Stuff we need to do and talk about. So.
Okay. Fantastic.
Everybody.
Bye.
Have a great time. Thank you all. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.